Anne and I have been, what is the right verb? Wading through hours and hours of interviews and trying to think, how do we take all of these conversations from this summer, 75 interviews, 75 conversations, about 75 hours of material. How do we take all those transcripts and shape it into a narrative, a story about how church musicians are doing, and and how might that not only be descriptive of the state of at least this sample set of church musicians, but how might we even be bold enough to be prescriptive about how churches and supervisors and personnel committees could encourage and nurture the work of church music ministry. So, Anne, I just want to turn it over to you for a few minutes and let you share with the group your perspective, what you've gleaned from this, maybe certainly with even fresher eyes than I had coming to this.
Yeah. Well, this is fun. So I am a writer, and so I work best from writing. So I actually did type out a few notes so that I wouldn't forget to say some of the things that I wanted to. So if I'm looking away, you know why. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself heading into it because I think it helps to kind of frame things a little bit. There's some stuff in here that even Doug and Marianne don't know. So this is the unofficial bio, right? So music is my first language. It really is. I just had a knack for it growing up. I was always involved in music. I played piano from the age of 7. You wouldn't know that now, sadly, because as you know, you have to keep up the craft, and I didn't. Somewhere in high school, my piano teacher figured out that I had perfect pitch, and I had no idea what that was. I just thought when you played an F and you heard an F, that was an F. And so I just knew that was an F. I had no idea that it was anything different. So that was an interesting kind of discovery. And I learned in college then, when you had to take the musicianship classes and do the transposing, that was very difficult for me because if I saw a note, that's the note it was. I couldn't hear a different note. It was very interesting. I kind of had to learn later in my music career, I guess, how to do some of the work because I didn't have to do it. Anyway, I started playing oboe in 6th grade, and I went to college as an oboe performance major. And about halfway through, I switched to church music. So that is my bachelor's degree, is in Bachelor of Music and Church Music from Baylor University. And then after my bachelor's degree, I went on to Truett Seminary. But at Truett, I solely studied theology, and that kind of became my love from that point forward. And I worked in a church in San Antonio at Woodland Baptist Church as an associate pastor for 4 years. And then for 2 years at Wilshire, which, as Doug said, is how I know Doug and Marianne. But church music and all that comes with that, the theology, the craft, is very much part of my heart. It's part of my history. It's part of who I am. So, now I'm a mother of 2. I have some work on the side that I do. My kids require quite a bit, but I do some writing and some editing. So this project kind of called upon a lot of different skills, a lot of different skill sets, and I've just had a really great time doing it. It very much resonates with me. So I just want you to know that going in, and I'm very grateful to Doug for reaching out to me and asking me to do this. So several years ago, actually, that's not what here we go. All right. I already said that part. Before we started writing, as Doug mentioned, we were tasked with reading somewhere in the ballpark of 35 to 40 of the interviews each. Because after we read the first few together, we thought, okay, there is a way to do this without us needing to each read them all. And we would, meet together and talk about our findings. The first thing I will say is that to me, it really felt like an honor to listen in on these conversations. It felt like we were overhearing some very deeply personal and meaningful stories. And you just don't get the opportunity in life to do that very often. And coming from so many different people, it was really an experience. So the people who were interviewed shared some very poignant stories, some thoughtful insights. It was clear across the board that church musicians, this being a cohort, value and appreciate their craft and are conscientious about what it means for the church as a whole. It left me a sense with a sense that yes, this is important work. The work that Polyphony is doing, because it's calling upon practicing church musicians to dig deep and consider what needs to be preserved, what needs to be passed from one generation to the next. And indeed, many of those interviewed expressed a sense of responsibility for passing the baton and for the future of the church. I remember when I was in ministry, a colleague of mine saying that part of his sense of calling was to bear the tradition. And I loved that. Mm. And I felt a real sense of that. It's something that kind of came away from the writing and has really stuck with me now that I have a little bit of distance from it, is that it's very important to the folks who have been going through this process to think about what we need to give to future generations. So there's deep dedication and love for the craft. How do we pass that on? How do we mentor next generations of leaders? How do we nurture a call to music ministry in future generations and faithfully carry on and also expand the traditions that we ourselves inherited? So these are valuable conversations that need to be happening in our churches and in the academy. Doug helped to frame the project from the beginning as gathering qualitative data. And that was very helpful for me because I have this sort of, as many musicians do, we're kind of a mix of the art and the science, right? So there was part of me that wanted to make a chart and it was like, everybody answered this way on this question. Everybody answered this way on this question. And that just simply was not possible. So as best as we could, we drew out the essence of the responses. We reported on recurring themes. We shared some quotes and anecdotes throughout. So many of the stories are rich and meaningful. I'm thinking of a little bit of a contrast here, but there was a story from a career music minister who conducted at Carnegie Hall, for example, and in the height of his work, even at landmark cathedrals in Rome, right? So we've got his responses. And then there was an organist who reflected on the humility that it takes to practice in front of other people and, kind of submitting yourself to people hearing you not at your best. And, but then on the other hand, the sense of accomplishment that comes with working through just a hard place in a piece of music. So it was a pretty wide spectrum of stories. And I thought that was just lovely. I was struck by the theme that church musicians are really working in two realms simultaneously. There's always the music realm, but there's also the personal realm of working with people. And that those who are called into this ministry really have to have skill in both areas, in both arenas. The music is often what drives people into music ministry. But if they don't have the people skills, they're not going to make it for long, right? So it's the people part that will make it or break it. And most successful music ministers do have a strong people orientation. So I just thought that was interesting because we might not even think about that really. There was some very interesting reflection on worship styles. And, especially as someone reading this who was, 20, 25 years ago thinking about these things, right? We're in a very different place now than we were. And overall, there's a sense that the quote unquote worship wars of yesteryear are largely behind us. And that we've moved into a time where we're less about reaction and more about reform. And I thought that was just a really nice way to frame it. So most church musicians that were interviewed for the sake of this study are steeped in a more traditional or even liturgical tradition, um, or model. But a few did express a desire and openness to working with a more blended style of worship. But across the board, there is a commitment to quality and to good theology, which is just a very encouraging thing to hear from my standpoint. So another theme that I thought was poignant is that there is such a need for community and networking among church musicians. So ministry can be very lonely, whatever position you're in. It's definitely true of pastors. It's true of church musicians as well. And many church musicians do find a sense of community in their choir. But it's also important to be a participant sometimes. And I loved the way that a few folks pointed that out. So whether that's in a ministry group or in a community ensemble, it's important to have some areas where you don't have to be the leader. And in order for church musicians to have that kind of opportunity, churches need to be conscientious about building that into not just their budget, but also their allotment of time to be away from their particular church. So these are conversations that, as I think about the report that we have prepared, it gets me excited in my weird, nerdy sort of way to think about churches kind of overhearing that conversation, right? So just some interesting things to think about. One other point that stood out with me, and I tried when Doug asked me to talk about kind of a summary of my thoughts today, I tried not to go back and look at it because then I would remember everything. I tried to really think about the things that kind of stood out to me with a little bit of space. So another point that I thought was very interesting is that there is this sort of evolution of call, right? It's not really the case that people are called into ministry at all or music ministry and they know exactly what they're going to be doing and that's that, right? And so for many of the folks that we interviewed, they may have initially sensed a call to education, to missions, mostly to music. But for many, that progresses then to include more pastoral responsibilities and that kind of thing as well. And so I think it is very important to emphasize the need for theological education and having theologically educated church pastor musicians. And that's something that we talk about in the conclusions and the prescriptive part of the report. Overall, I guess what I want to communicate to you all is that I see great value in this project in working with church musicians to reflect on what they're doing and why, that they are the bearers of tradition, educators, as well as musicians and ministers, helping people to understand what it is we do in worship and why that's different from what happens virtually anywhere else in our culture. So I want to leave you with one of the remarks that I just loved. It relates both to calling and also to what one interviewee sees as the best part of being a church musician, which was one of our questions. So this particular interviewee was in high school before anyone ever pointed out to him that he had musical talent, right? And it was a high school music teacher that kind of pulled him aside and began to mentor him. And then once he went to college, he had a mentor in college as well, and eventually started an internship at a local church. And he was given a lot of responsibility for the music in the church, more than he'd ever had before. So he was doing conducting for the first time and that nature of things. And it was there, he said, that he really had a sense for the first time of community and fellowship and an understanding that this gift of music that he had been given did not just have to be for him, that
Mhm.
there, this was something that could be shared broadly and enrich not only his life, but the lives of people he encountered. So this is what he says. I began to realize over time that there's no amount of money that's ever going to make you happy. There's no amount of accolades that will ever make you feel affirmed. There's no amount of spotlight that will ever give what you do purpose. It won't be enough. It will never be enough. But I found that standing up in front of a group of people who were there because they wanted to be there, because they held great value in being in community together, that they were all there in service to a God that they desired to praise, that was so unique and different from what the rest of our world values. And I realized that getting to be a part of that would give my life meaning and purpose. And that is more important than anything else I could ever be able to achieve as a musician. Just like that. That's early in the report. So, another reflected on how what we're doing week to week is so much more than just singing, right? It's singing this music with these people in this place, worshiping this God. I was just, it's just, there's so much that is rich in the report that you just get this sense of, oh my gosh, there's just a wealth of experience and something that you cannot simply pass on without taking the time to be reflective in this way. So I really see this as an invitation to connect over what we do with music in the church that doesn't so much compete with all of the many things that are out there, opportunities, because competing is a losing battle. We'll never win that fight, right? But it helps us to grow roots in our faith and gives meaning to life. And I just found myself coming away from this very, very hopeful, very enriched for overhearing.
That was very beautiful, Anne. When I'm reinvigorated by that in the middle of Advent here,
Hmm.
uh, tired after a long Wednesday, a long week,
Yeah.
and that was those words just make me go, okay, we can. Sunday's coming.
Carry on. That's right.
And we
That's
carry
right.
on and bearers of tradition.
Yeah.
Wow, yeah, I love that.
Mhm.
Very cool. I'm so glad.
Well, Anne, we don't want to keep you in the middle of a busy season, but thank you so much for sharing some perspective and some insight with us this morning on our board meeting. I think this is really an important contribution that Polyphony makes to church musicians, to churches, and hopefully to the kingdom, really.
Yes. Yes. And thank you again for including me. I enjoyed being with you today.
Great. All right. Be well.
Okay, you too.
Love your family.
Merry
Thank
Christmas.